Maurice Nicol's Psychological Commentary, Volume 5, Amwell, June 27, 1953. The crowd of eyes in your being. As you know, we take our being as one and believe we have only one eye. This is an illusion. And as long as this illusion lasts, it is really impossible to change. There are many other illusions which prevent change of being. We have spoken recently about how being must change in order that understanding can change if we gain knowledge of this work. But if our being remains just the same, we cannot understand it. It is necessary to apply the work to one's being. One sign that a person is not working is that he or she remains just the same year after year. Now, our being is characterized by multiplicity, by which is meant that we have not one eye, but many eyes. Some of these eyes are very young and have persisted in us unchanged. We have, for example, many childish eyes that often cause a great deal of trouble. Although our body is of one age, we are all ages internally in our inner environment, that is, in our psyche. Physically, we are one age. Psychologically, we are many different ages. When a person is told to be his or her age, it probably means that the person acts too often from childish eyes. As I said, some of these eyes are very young and are not experienced. It is then necessary to separate from them. I will just say a word about separation from the different eyes. Have you ever listened to your eyes talking in you? Often eyes carry on a long conversation, but you do not observe it. You think it is you talking to yourself because of the illusion that you have only one you. You cannot do anything about this inner situation to separate from it. To think it is always you talking to yourself is to put the feeling of I into what is an I in you, to identify with each of the I's that are talking in you. When you believe that this is always you talking in yourself and you cannot see that it is different I's in you, and that you're making the mistake of putting your feeling into I, into each of these different I's, it is exactly like thinking that everyone talking in a room full of people is you talking. This inability to realize that it is different I's speaking in you, and that you are making a great work mistake in putting the feeling of I into each of these I's, leads to a stalemate situation in you and makes an internal separation from different I's impossible. I mean, that your being remains exactly the same because you hold on to it. That is to say, you do not change year after year, but remain just the same because by saying I to each I, you prevent any change. In other words, you are not applying the work to yourself. You are not applying what it teaches to yourself. You persist in thinking that you have no eyes, but that it is always the same I. You cannot see that it is a different eyes in you which insist on putting the feeling of I into, so that you call these different eyes you. That is to say, you say, I think, I feel, when you should see that it is an I that thinks or feels, and that you can withdraw the feeling from it. In fact, by always putting the feeling of I into every I in you, you hold yourself down to being what you always were. And that is the reason why you cannot change, or at least one very big reason. When you discover that a great many of these I's are certainly not you, and especially when you realize that these I's are of all different ages, you cannot believe it at first. You are so accustomed to saying I to everything that goes on in you, every voice that speaks in you, you regard as speaking. You regard as I speaking. That is what I mean when I say that you do not listen to your eyes talking in you, but always thinking it is you talking to yourself. That is to say, you are always identified with eyes that are not you. Now you cease identifying when you withdraw from the feeling of I from a thing. If you put the feeling of I into it, whatever it may be, you identify with it, which means that you think it is you. To identify means to make it the same. As long as you make the same as yourself, the different I's in you that constitute the multiplicity of I's in your being, you say to every I, this is me. You make yourself as the same as these different I's. It is necessary to withdraw the feeling of I from them. Then after a time, you can say, this is not I, but an I in me that has a great nuisance over the years, and which I now see is not me. You may see that it's an I in me that has been a great nuisance over the years, which you can now see is not me. When this stage is reached, a great step can be taken forwards in regard to inner separation. This step can really begin to lead to a change of being. Have you seen for yourself, psychologically, spiritually, that you would appear like a crowd of people walking along of every age, and some exceedingly naughty people amongst you? And if you introduce yourself, you would include everybody and call each person by your own name. Sometimes a crowd of people appear in dreams, and often a very odd crowd, some dressed up, some in rags, some deformed, and some in better shape, and so on. This is how a dream, in certain cases, when you begin to work, may represent you. This ill-assorted crowd of some queer people represents the multiplicity of your being. And I can assure you from personal experience on many occasions that it is a great shock when you realize what this representation of yourself means. But once you have begun to realize you are a multiplicity and have begun to cease saying I so easily to this crowd, you very rarely have the dream. It comes to assist you in a general way to start, then it stops. That is because you are beginning to distinguish yourself from the motley procession, this crowd that you have taken as yourself, as I. In fact, this is one of the times when you may have a glimpse of real I in the far distance. Once you see these eyes of your personal history are not you, but the vision passes. Let me repeat. As long as you think that you are all your different eyes, you are what is called identified with yourself. It means that you have no insight into yourself and you are not applying the work to yourself, not believing that you are many. It means you have not grasped that you have many eyes in you, but are still under the sensual illusion that there is only one eye because there is only one body. As long as you're identified with yourself, your being cannot change. Now, a brief word about consequences of the different eyes in us being of different ages. An eye may have formed itself early in our life when we were in an unusually unhappy circumstance due to perhaps a parent, a brother, sister, or governess. And when we felt and thought it was all very unfair. When our circumstances changed as we grew older, we had no reason to feel things were unfair. But this I formed at an earlier time still persists in us. Because we do not separate from it and therefore take it as I, it pops to the surface when any difficulty arises and eagerly controls us and makes us unhappy. In this way, we are imprisoned by the I's that are anachronisms, that is, that do not belong to the present time, but to the past. Distinct, calm observation of them as being early I's belonging to situations long ended and not valid anymore, and saying to them, "This is not I," or "I am not this I." And seeing that even though they spoke some truth once upon a time, they do not now do so. In short, separating from them by no longer identifying and so believing them can, after a determined struggle, cause them gradually to wane to shadows. You will feel a miraculous freedom, but if you go to sleep to them, and once more foolishly let the feeling of I into them again, it is like transfusing them with your blood, and they soon revive and with the greatest delight reproduce in posture, expression, intonation, feeling, and thought all the old unhappiness. We all suffer from these early, out-of-date I's, and will, as long as we believe we have only one I, and therefore say I to the crowd of I's of all different ages in us. Now, please realize that as long as you say, "I wish I were not so worried," you are saying to your worrying, and thus identifying with it. You are not separating from it and starving it. On the contrary, you are giving it a transfusion of your blood. For every time you say, "I wish I were not so worried," you are putting the feeling of I into an I.